Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'm Jeremy Walsh. I'm the owner and creative director at Soulbound Studios. On my left, I have Miguel Sozo Sierra, technical designer and world builder for Chronicles of Elyria.
Howdy.
On my right, you have Jason Death Welter, the UI UX designer for Chronicles of Elyria. Well, we're gonna do the best we can to get through as many of these we can. My goal is to make this the most informative, most interesting Q&A we've done thus far. So with that in mind, and pleasantries aside, let's dive in. The team is doing quite well. We continue to hire. We are well over 20 people now. We actually do have 2 new people joining us in the studio in May and June. We have our new...
Three.
Three. We have a new client, our senior client engineer. We have our new community manager. And then...
the House of D has fallen.
Oh no. And then we have our community support lead. So a lot more community focus, making sure that you guys are feeling like we're hearing you, that you have a voice, and then also that there's a good line of communication from us to you. I imagine that when our new community manager, kind of community producer comes on, we're going to be doing a lot more videos for you guys, a lot more in-game content, some other fun things we might do to let you guys kind of see what it's like development in the studio. And that just fell down. I saw the reflection there in the glass. So all kinds of new community stuff coming along, and it feels good when we get new people in the office. It keeps it fresh and lively, and yeah. So moving on. One of the reasons we chose to use the Unreal Engine is because it is constantly under development. If you take a look at games even developed, a year or two ago versus the ones now, you'll see constant improvements in the material systems, in the crafting and AI, sound systems, the skeletal animation and skinning, and all kinds of other cool stuff. And so by basing our game on that client, it means that as the Unreal Engine continues to evolve, obviously through Epic's development and through other licensees that kind of contribute back towards the Unreal Engine. As they're making improvements to that, we actually get the benefit of those. So we hope that the game engine never looks stale and that it always looks better and better as we go along. I was talking to our engineers earlier today, and that is absolutely one of the things that we plan on doing. We're in the process of refactoring a lot of our backend system right now, particularly so that we can expose those APIs to you guys. It also makes it so that our website and our game engine are all using the same kind of basic platform and API system. But yes, our plan is to expose those to you guys so that you can write apps and extensions. This is actually a fun question for me. The name Chronicles of Elyria has been there since the game existed in our current incarnation. However, the whole concept of Chronicles of Elyria began with a design document I wrote back in 2000 for what was ultimately going to be initially a text-based MUD, and then converted into kind of a 2D game, since that's what MUDs were, or that's what MMOs were back at the time, or kind of isometric top-down. And that kind of graphical and text-based MUD that I was writing the design document for was called Taviran, and it was based on the Wheel of Time. The short answer to that is no. In my mind, I would really like that 100,000 to be the minimum standard, not the maximum. One of the nice things about using Spatial OS as our backend technology is that it scales out virtually infinitely horizontally, which means that we can make the continent as large as we want it to be, we can make the overall globe or map as large as we want it to be, and we can fit virtually as many players as we want to scattered across the realm. The technical challenge with really any massively multiplayer game right now isn't about how large the server or the world can be, it's how many people you can get in a single settlement. Because no matter how good the technology is, the limitations of physics mean that when you get hundreds or thousands of people in a small confined area, it becomes extremely difficult to manage all that on the client side. But we do have a really large world, and so our goal is that while we want to hit that 100,000 mark early on, over time we hope that it hits 200 or 250 or really as much as it can be.
To be fair, there could be constraints.
There could be. I mean, we don't know yet.
We don't necessarily want to have X amount of people. There might be design reasons why we want to cap it at 200 or 250.
Right. The short answer though is no. 100,000 is not a hard cap. So it's not like when the 100,000th player comes in or character that we're just going to suddenly stop people from joining that server.
Implicit contracts are the contracts that basically deal with taxes. So you enter a kingdom and there's an implicit contract saying that you're going to have to pay taxes. There are explicit contracts though that you can make with your count or whoever essentially is the leader of your settlement, that gives different variables for what you might pay in tax.
So they'll be able to bring the taxes into like a strong box or something like that. But whether it's an implicit contract or an explicit contract, if they fail to do that, then you can use the bounty system to go ahead and send somebody out to collect those taxes. And if the implicit law says things like if you don't pay your taxes on time, then there's a 10% penalty, then using the bounty token, the tax collector would be able to go collect that 100% that you owed plus the 10% in interest. There's this kind of fine line that we're doing with this game between, you know, adding the realistic elements like needing to travel in order to deliver objects with a more automated approach that we want so that people don't feel like they have to micromanage things. So, you know, being able to initiate a bounty on people so that a tax collector can come in and pick up that bounty and then go collect that money without you having to be online using a companion app or just doing it using an in-game GUI and not have to go manually pick it up yourself or not having to walk around and shout in the streets looking for a tax collector. We want to automate that part of it, but we still like the idea of having people manually go and collect the taxes themselves. It also means that people who don't want to pay have an opportunity to defend and to decline to pay, and then it gets all kinds of cool. One of the things we had talked about in a previous Q&A was that the nobility and aristocracy, specifically the counts, have ownership or management responsibility for the parcels of land within their county, but the people who were buying land using the EP system don't have a negotiated contract out of the gate. So there's no negotiation as to how much they would pay initially. And I told people not to worry about that, that there was kind of a system in place to handle that, that you should still do a negotiation, but that we were going to leave that for after the fact. So let me expound on that a little bit. With the implicit laws in place, the count can actually set a global tax rate for the entire county. So if your parcel of land lies within this region, or if it's got these resources on it, things like that, then this is the amount of taxes that you owe. And so everybody then would be prone to that tax rate, regardless of whether or not they negotiated a contract. However, if you were one of those people who purchased land as a result of your EP, while that is the default tax rate, you have the opportunity to go to your account during exposition and negotiate a cheaper rate, which we encourage you to do so, because those are the people who are going to be there in the early days trying to help make sure that the county succeeds. The reason we are kind of refactoring it to work like this is we felt like that it was better to put the onus of responsibility on, what was the word that you used?
Being an agent of your own.
Yeah.
Of your own cause.
Yeah, being an agent of your own cause. We wanted the agent of cause to be lying with the individual property owners and not with the counts, because we felt like that put a lot of responsibility on the counts. It also posed a significant disadvantage to them. Well, not a significant. It was a fairly small disadvantage because the number of parcels of land that are actually going to be consumed through the EP system is relatively small compared to the overall number of parcels in a county. But this felt like a good system overall. You know, they set the global tax rate for people who are going to be coming into the game after launch, or just whatever they feel is comfortable. And then the individuals that purchase land through the EP system during exposition can go to the count and negotiate a cheaper rate if they can work it out. Now, the opposite is also true. If a count comes in and sets a super high tax rate at the very beginning, something that's, you know, uncomfortable for the landowners who exist during exposition, they might find themselves overthrown even before exposition ends and launch begins. So you got to make sure you balance that. So we don't have terraforming. So you can't raise and lower the terrain or anything like that. We do have the tunneling system. So you could use that to dig out caves and caverns. And as we talk about the tribes in our upcoming design journal, there are tribes that use those caves and caverns and mines more specifically. But your ability to ultimately modify the terrain is relatively low. The idea is that Silver Run Mine is a good example of what kind of things you can do. Obviously the Silver Run Mine was more hand-tailored because we wanted it to really demonstrate the parkour system and kind of what mobility looks like, but we didn't want it to be too far from what people can expect. So it functions similar in the sense that you need to dig things out, you need to add supports and beams and platforms and scaffolding and things like that. We actually haven't done much on it at this point. The tunneling and mining system, I kind of want to point that out. It was a highly rated question. The tunneling and mining system was actually one of our...
There goes the rest of it.
That did not make it. The tunneling and mining system was one of our stretch goals, so we deferred starting on that until a little bit later. We've been designing it. We know the tools and how the user experience for that is going to work to a large degree, but we haven't actually started technical implementation on that. But Nathan and I and Steve, our lead server programmer and our client programmer, have been talking quite a bit about what the user interface looks like from an engineering standpoint and kind of how that's going to be stored on the back end from a data standpoint. So we're pretty confident and comfortable in how things are going to work. We just haven't actually begun engineering on that system yet.
Yeah, that's for sure the goal. There are a lot of interesting and intricate parts that go into a mine. And there's also a lot of problems that are created from trying to create a mine. And that's interesting, that's fun, that gives you something to do and engage with. If it was just a button press, that's boring. If it was something you could do by yourself, that's not realistic and also boring. So yes, there are going to be lots of struggles that you can't solve or handle individually. And it's going to need to be a community thing. And when I say community, I mean, you know, you can hire employees. It's not like, you know, like you're necessarily like, yeah, let's go build a mine together. But
you might.
You might, and you can't. But it's definitely not a one-man gig, and
No.
it's not a simple endeavor.
So there are a couple of options during exposition. The first of which is to take control of an existing settlement. That's what we consider the default approach, because you're going to get a lot of resources from an existing settlement. Plus, the existing settlement's going to be generated in a location that we know is sustainable for the most part, and so your likelihood of surviving there are going to be easier. Plus, there's already a population of NPCs in that settlement, so chances of having people that cover a wide range of occupations are already there. So by and large, you're going to want to start with an existing settlement. If you do that, then you're going to have an opportunity to place buildings down in unoccupied parcels, as well as to expand the radius, as well as to pay resources for the NPCs to upgrade their existing buildings and things like that. You cannot uproot the NPCs in their current locations and move the buildings around. So it's not like a design phase where
it's not SimCity.
It's not a creative mode. It's not like SimCity. Yeah, exactly. The idea is you're coming into an established settlement as a new, not as a new, but theoretically as a new ruler of that settlement, and now you're giving them the resources, the NPCs that exist, to build up the things that they own, as well as to build things yourself as a landowner in that settlement in the places that you feel like it's going to be most advantageous. On the other hand, you can go off someplace and start a new settlement. It's a more expensive process. It's going to take a little time to attract the NPCs and stuff that you need there, but it gives you complete control over the layout and everything like that. But like I said, your chances of survival in a startup settlement like that, especially if you're doing it on your own, are significantly more challenging.
Yes, it'll have an effect. You have to respect the various attributes of the tribes. Things such as prejudice add a layer of depth to any world, and they make them infinitely more relatable. Prejudice is something that we face all the time in reality. It would be unrealistic for us not to have some elements of that present. Now, whether or not it's higher prices or how NPCs behave and act towards them, we don't know. But there could certainly be challenges regarding different tribes interacting with each other, which is intentional.
When you breed and you have a child, it does a random sampling of genetics, and you have the opportunity to do a reroll. And the genetics are sampled from both parents, and there are certain constrained genetics. So if it picks the eye color of one of the parents, it'll also pick, for example, the hair color from one of those parents, so that we don't end up with like unnatural combinations. But aside from those constraints, it's not always going to be a direct in the middle of the road like hybrid. It'll always pick some samples from one and from the other and end up with varying combinations. And then when you do a reroll, you get a different sample from the parents. Beyond that, you don't have a lot of ability to customize, other than once it does the random sampling from both parents, you have the ability to move the sliders between the two so that you can end up with something. But many of them are Boolean. So for example, eye color, it's going to be, after the random sampling, you can choose mom's eye color or dad's eye color, but it's not going to create a hybrid color. It's just going to allow you to pick between them. So you do have some degree of customization, but you are still constrained by the bloodline system.
Yeah, it'd probably be like, different types of fertilizer could be used.
Right.
Crop rotations would probably be really good.
Right.
Creating hybrid plants, maybe? There could be something in that farther on.
There is cross-pollination in scope.
Certain problems that could arise that we were discussing earlier, like insect invasions and different things like that you'd have to deal with as the problems arise.
Farming should be more enjoyable than like the traditional MMO is like you find a spot of rich soil. You have seed in inventory, put seed in inventory, come back in a week. Hey, look, a plant. It's not that fun, not that enjoyable.
Exactly.
And there should be something for everyone in COE, right? Like if you want to figure out how to make like a really special breed of plant that survives in colder climates, being able to have that opportunity to experiment, almost the same as like an alchemist would, figuring out what would work best in which area.
Right.
I think there's a lot of enjoyment that can be found there, and most games just sort of drop the ball on that, where they're just like, yeah, you can farm in our game. Look, you can make plants. You can get food to reuse it. I think there's more to it than that.
We want it to feel like its own game within the game, because we really do understand that, I mean, in a survival game, making sure that you have food and water and things like that is so extremely important that, you know, every settlement is going to have to do it. There's going to have to be people in every settlement who are engaged in this actively. Yeah. And if it's not entertaining, then
I guess everyone's going to starve.
Then that's going to be a problem, yeah. So, yeah. But I expect it to be, the way it's scoped right now is it's a fairly complex system. We do have bees. There is cross-pollination that can happen. There is all kinds of cool stuff.
As you learn the tech for it, you start branching out, so like you'll start moving farther away from rivers. And I think we're going to get something very similar with COE. People are going to follow the easy resources, rivers, streams, lakes, oceans. They'll stay near there. They'll expand out as technology evolves, and they figure out how to do irrigation, how to get pipes moving, things like that. You're going to see people start branching into places that they couldn't have previously gotten to. So I think Absolutely. Irrigation will actually, and water sources in general, are going to play a huge part with just general populations moving, cities being erected in interesting locations.
As in the wild, in our world, the gender is usually visually deterministic. So, for example, among the driest elk, for example, the females are smaller and have different antlers. The ursifonts have different tusks. Right. There's a couple of things. So, but generally there'll be a coloring, a coat, a size, or something like that that'll allow you to individually determine. You don't have to like go out and look under the animal's skirts or anything like that. They can be farmed and cultivated as well. In fact, when you're out in the wild and you farm or cultivate or cut down a tree or something like that, as a byproduct of cutting them down, it almost always will give you a seed or something like that. And we do that to kind of help reduce the likelihood of there being deforestation and other things. So generally speaking, when you cut down a plant or a tree, it's going to give you a seed or a sapling. If you think about the way water is normally done in games as just like a water plane, it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly that having things like flooding is extremely expensive, and being able to divert water through means other than irrigation or piping is very expensive. But that being said, you know, we do want people to be able to pump the water and move it around. We do expect the water table to rise and lower during different seasons. And we do expect it to flow and things like that. But your ability to actually divert water, like, let's say, dig a canal and expecting the river to change direction, like we mentioned before, there's no terraforming. So at this point, there is no plan to allow you to create your own rivers and to divert the flow of water. That one is in the affirmative.
It's easier to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't even require water physics.
Right. So rivers that are based on splines and things like that give us basically a direction that the water is moving. And so when people step into water, or when you place objects in the water, allowing it to move with a vector down the flow of the spline is something that's much easier to do. And that creates a couple cool design mechanics for us. For one, throwing barrels in the river and sending them down the river for trade reasons is a really good thing. Also, it creates fast-moving rivers, or the opportunity for fast-moving rivers to be a blockade or a preventative thing for people moving through the wilds. So we do expect that the water will move. First of all, moving through snowy areas does cause you to fall slightly below the snow. You'll probably be kicking up snow and other particles around the base of your feet. And then over time, we actually keep track, because movement is affected by the terrain that you're moving across. We constantly have to be checking to see, you know, for the tile that you're standing on, how does that affect your movement speed? So when we do that, we can actually increment things that say, since it started snowing, you've touched this area X number of times, and we can use that to actually lower the amount of snow in that region, so that even when it's snowing out, as players path around, that it starts to wear into the snow and create little like pathable regions where you can see the ground again and stuff like that. The contracts can be fairly complex, using a combination of conjunctions and clauses, remuneration, conditions on things like time, quantity, locations, and things like that. You can do some pretty cool complex stuff.
Combination, it's gonna have to deal with your current skill level and the materials used. So like, if you're really skilled but you have crappy materials and a lot of slag in your castings, it's gonna be a shitty product. It'll break really fast. Opposite being true, you're using really good materials, you're a shitty craftsman, probably not gonna have a good sword. It's gonna be bulky, overweighted. So you'll probably have to be working with a combination of the two. You wanna find the best materials and be as trained as you can be to make something, you know, really good quality. You'd probably be inspecting it, taking a look at it. Then you might actually have to do some tests too, the same as like you would do with a regular sword. There's some people who are going to pick it up and know instinctively a long sword that weighs approximately 12 stones is like the best long sword you could find. It's a trademark when they're perfectly balanced like that. And then you might have to start whacking at a target dummy to see, you know, how many chops it takes to knock the thing down. So you can start grading by guessing things like that. We might go into some more detail with like inspecting.
Ultimately, what he's getting at is things like decorative type stuff, you know, filigree,
Maker's marks.
Maker's
Okay,
marks
that's
and
what I
things
was
like
gonna
that.
say,
So, I mean, part of it is going to be the material. We also have our rust system and like degradation. So looking at a weapon and being able to determine that it's rusted versus not rusted is going to give you an idea of the oxidization of the metal and things like that. Whether or not it visually looks like it's starting to break along the edges, or whether or not it still looks like it's in pristine shape. So I mean, you'll be able to tell visually. Obviously, you know, if you look at a finely crafted weapon like a rapier that's got a really nice cross guard on it versus, you know, just kind of like a standard iron longsword, you're going to be able to tell that one was done by a significantly better crafter with better resources. So you should be able to identify visually, but as Jason was saying, sometimes it's going to be a matter of going out and using it to really understand what's different about it.
It won't make as much difference if you have someone in like the best gear in the world versus the worst gear, because it's still going to rely on your skill as a player and how you use it and what you do with it to make good use of it.
I think ultimately the point is that, you know, gear progression in Chronicles of Elyria isn't really a thing. You know, the gear progression is a matter of making sure you have the right tool for the job and making sure that the quality and durability of the armor and the weapons and the tools that you're using are higher, so that they don't break as quickly. They're situationally better, you know, and that sort of thing. So people are going to be cycling through equipment more frequently in this game than they would be in many games, but not because they're trying to upgrade their gear to get the better stats and stuff like that. Just because, you know, in a game that has this type of realism in a closed, finite, economy-based world, you know, when your armor gets damaged, you can only repair it so many times, and then it just becomes too thin to repair, and you have to replace it. So usually you'll go out and gather a bunch of lumber, gather a bunch of stone, gather a bunch of slate or whatever else is that you need, bring it on site, process it there, create the 2x4s of the beams, construct the frames out of it, and then start to put the frames up. And so as you're attaching the frames, you should see it kind of generally go up, much like you would see a building in our world go up, with like one wall at a time or one segment of a wall at a time, until eventually it's fully complete and then your building is done. There will be certain materials that are fixed that are required, such as the framing. In order to support the number of floors that you want and things like that will require certain types of materials. Other things are more aesthetic and are cosmetic, and so you can actually swap those out. Like, you could potentially use different types of siding depending upon what biome you're in. Kind of an implicit question here is it a single person job? It is not. Much like in our world, you're generally going to need people of different skills and kind of responsibilities. There's going to need to be masons, there's going to need to be lumberjacks and carpenters and architects and things like that. So it's generally going to be a multi-person process to build a building in this game. Depends upon what biome you're in, what type of building you built, and the quality of materials that you're using. High quality materials in a biome that's compatible with the materials that you're using will require only periodic maintenance, but if you try and build something in a biome that doesn't make sense or with lower quality materials, you might find you're having to repair more frequently. You can cross-train in skills. You can learn enough in carpentry that you can do the woodworking to make a good handle. You can do enough in metalworking to be able to make the blade and pommel, and you can effectively specialize in being a sword maker. On the other hand, if you're trying to build a house, which would require, you know, wood and masonry and potentially metalworking and glass working or glass blowing and things like that, there's going to be too much there for one person to be able to effectively learn on their own. So I guess it depends on what it is that you're trying to build. So we have a couple mechanics. There's the OPCs to make sure that you're at least able to do kind of the more mundane tasks while you're offline. And then there's bolstering, which makes it so that when you play with other family members, that your attributes are escalated to that of the highest member of your little party that's also in your family. There is no catch-up mechanic beyond those currently. We do not have any mechanics. Our mechanics right now for allowing people to opt into different player experiences for exposition ends with the end of exposition. So once the game begins, you cannot buy anything from us, whether that be skill boosts, crafting items, components, or anything like that that would give you some kind of advantage. The general idea is that members of different tribes or cultures will be able to speak different languages. That'll show up differently in chat for everyone else, and exposure to those other languages over time will allow you to gradually pick up on more and more of that language until eventually your character will understand the language and thus communicate the information to you. That's true of NPCs and things like that as well. So they'll often try and use languages in order to mask information from you. You'll probably find things written in different languages with different alphabets and runic systems, all to throw you off and make it difficult for you to figure out what the information is actually saying. How much customization and freedom you'll have for your offline players is quite a bit. We're working on a node-based scripting language that allows you to visually program what you want your OPC to do. We will use a very, very similar system for the development of our own AI. They can only do things which no longer provide you skill benefits, and you cannot tell them to do things in an automated fashion, like go home. Your OPC will never be able to do things that you as a player could not do. So when you want to do things like go home, instead of just saying go home, you have to tell it go this direction for this distance, or go this direction until you see this, and then turn south or then turn north. So you actually have to know where you are in order to know where you want to go. Two ways. Number one, you can ask them to demonstrate. Prove that they know how to use the combat techniques. Prove that they know how to craft the thing that they say they can. The other way you can do that is through schools and other things. So one of the benefits of joining an organization like a school is that they can provide certifications or other awards or merits or ribbons and things like that. And so based on the honor of the academy, if a prestigious organization says, I certify that this person has mastered these skills, then you can be fairly confident that they have in fact mastered them. We've been very specific about making sure that people know that when talking in-game using say, shout, whisper, that you're in character. At the same time, when you're using general chat channels that you've created, not general chat channels, when you're using the chat channel system that we're providing, that it's done using your user alias, and that's out of character. So you've got an in-character and an out-of-character environment. We did that specifically because we know that this game deals with sensitive topics. Sexism, racism, religion, the ability to declare war, family murder, like, patricide, deicide, not deicide, but patricide, matricide, I want to overthrow my family's dynasty, so I'm going to kill my in-game mother, that sort of stuff. People making threats like, I'm going to kill you and your whole family. Like, those are things that in our world would be considered completely taboo, probably get the authorities called on you and things like that. But we still want those things to be available.
It's funny though.
We still want those things to be available to be done in-game and remain in character, but we want people to be able to disassociate between what's in character and what's out of character. So at this point, we're generally going to take a hands-off approach to things that are going on in character. So while we certainly wouldn't condone players going around being rude to everyone, if that's the role you want to play, if that's the character persona you want to adopt, then we would expect people to deal with you in-game as you're interacting with them in-game. However, doing that out of character using the chat channel system will get you punished pretty quickly. Threatening to attack somebody or to insulting people in and out of character communication channel would be against our code of conduct and will be moderated accordingly. It really depends on the psychology of the NPC. If you're walking up to an NPC bandit hideout, they're probably going to attack you on sight in the same way that if I walked into like an enemy military camp, they're not going to try and negotiate with me. Something to keep in mind is we're not really encouraging open world PvP. While we make it an option, we're not going to make that an objective. In the same way that there's not really incentive in our world to walk around outside and beat people up. Like, does it happen? Yeah. Is it incentivized? Not really. Will there be worthwhile objectives to fight over, such as land? Absolutely. However, you generally want to do that legally. Will there be world bosses? There will be, but that's not really player versus player. Trade runs, there will certainly be trade routes. Can you fight over the trade routes? You can burglar, like you can pickpocket, you can do all those things. They're generally not considered positive behavior, those are deviant, but they are doable. Mm-hmm. Will there be safe zones which do not allow for PvP? Really no area allows for PvP unless you're in wartime. However, there's no mechanics that prevent you from doing it anywhere. While we allow open world PvP everywhere, the game is designed for player versus player conflict to happen in ways that do not require a sword and shield. There are ways to affect other people socially, economically, religiously, culturally, politically. There are all kinds of really cool ways where you can impact another player that doesn't require hitting them with a stick or a metal blade.
But it's certainly an option.
That is an option. Will there be arenas? Yes. Ranked or unranked? Yes. With rewards? Yes. There are gladiatorial combat and things like that. Currently, we're looking at both knife and dart throwing, as well as just improvised throwing. So basically picking up an object and throwing it at someone. Archery is more complex, needing to keep in mind things like wind, resistance, range, strength, like draw strength, the type of bow you're using, and velocity latency. So an object that moves, the bullet's not necessarily going to track. So you also need to kind of keep in mind that your target may not be where you think they are. So you need to
hit scan.
aim in advance, right? So in other words, ranged is going to be super interesting, very challenging, but also very productive. Yes.
I mean, if you couldn't do that, what's the freaking point, right?
We make it challenging because of the risk-reward trade-off. If it's really hard to hit a moving target from far away because of like the need to recognize wind and other things like that, then you should be rewarded for being able to hit them. So on a smaller scale, there's things like gladiatorial combat, there are mercenaries or paid guards, all of which could be legal. There are bounty hunters who go out and collect things from people. On a larger scale, there are, again, mercenaries who go around and volunteer their sword for different government organizations. You could be a government in general, aiming to conquer the world.
Imperialism.
Imperialism, yeah. Imperial expansion. Like, while you might not legally be able to just invade another kingdom and conquer them, and you might risk the wrath of other kingdoms coming in and getting involved, that doesn't mean you can't do it. So if you feel like you can withstand the onslaught of all of the other kingdoms, then you can certainly just invade somebody. So thank you guys for joining us. The next Q&A will be coming up next month, and it will be on tribes. Tribes.
Yay.
Thanks, guys. It's secure.
We got a town crier mug.
Ooh, the town crier mug.
Nice.
Look at that. Oh my god.
That is a nice.
That is a nice
die.
one. That is, yeah.
That is a
And
really
the
nice
detail on
die.
that? Oh, we may have to do a set change.
Is any of it edible?
At the same.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my god.
Snack time.
Treats.
Rotate.
Rotate.
Wow, look at that.
Well, there's the entire wall.
People are wanting us to partake in more apple juice.
Because we totally don't drink enough around here.
No.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sending all that stuff along. We will definitely enjoy the fresh IPA and the snacks, and we have now more mugs and steins to put them in.